All right. The light's flashing. All right, I'll go ahead and get us kicked off tonight. I know people are still joining us, but we've got a lot to cover tonight, so I want to get started. This is week 3, school and legal environment. Review one or more cases and reflect on the impact of schools. Principal's Guide, Chapter 2, OMA task. This week's discussion board was examine a school or field trip policy. What do you do when a car rear ends the bus? A lot of you have already responded. Excellent responses. The only thing that, and I only have maybe one of these. Always remember that when you're in an accident, call the police first. You don't want it to appear that you're trying to hide anything by calling the school. Call emergency services 911. Call them first. You never know when there's more injury than you think. You don't want to, have to go to court and explain why you didn't call for help first. Help is first, and then we'll worry about the political ramifications or fallout. So make sure that when you're in any kind of an accident like that and you're out in public, it's a police issue. Get them on the scene as quickly and emergencies, those kinds of things. Sometimes there's delayed reactions. This one is kind of personal to me. I was principal of a junior high school in Charlotte. We had this exact case to happen. A car rear-ended the bus. They called back to the school, and I said, "Have you called the police?" And I said, "No." And they said, "No, we called you." I said, Call the police now." And unfortunately, by the time by the time the police got there were people laying out in the road that just drove up and acted like they were in the wreck. It turned into just an unbelievable scene. I couldn't believe it myself. And so, the issue is that you need to call emergency personnel first and foremost. All right, so that's what we're doing this week. That's what you're working on your discussion board. Find out the policy for your district. Many of you have dug down deeper and found that some of your districts don't really have it outlined. Some of you have districts that it's outlined perfectly. I suspect that the ones where it's outlined perfectly, they've had an incident or two and they've gotten sued. That's usually what it takes for you to fix your policy up and make sure it's more relevant. I hate to say that. That's just the truth. All right, so that's what we're doing this week. All right, let's look at our evidence artifacts where we should be. Let me go to new share. Evidence artifact peer review. This is week 3. Discussion of the prompts and room books for the next 2 weeks. So I'm going to again talk about task 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. You should be scheduling your peer review sessions for OMA task 1 by now. That's where you should be in task 3. All right, and then next week it says OMA 1 candidates only. What that means is you should be working next week. I will be online doing our regular class next week, but you folks need to start your Zooming and those kinds of things next week. I will be here as usual at 7 o'clock doing the lesson. All right, so that's where we are on our evidence artifacts. Speaking of evidence artifacts, new share. That's the one I want right there. All right, the task now. What I'm concerned with about task 1 so far is folks don't understand what internal context is. It says the candidate examines the school and its context internally and externally. The internal context is everything that's on the state report card. Now, whether you agree that that's the way schools ought to be measured or not, we could argue that till the cows come home. But the truth is the internal context of a school and what the public believes and what politician believes the internal context is represented on that state report card. So you should access yours. It's really easy to do. Your state report card, and you summarize the material on that state report card. That's your internal context. Your external context can be found in your SACS accreditation or usually it's there's a chapter in your school improvement plan that outlines the average median income, the demographics of your school community, those kinds of things. Then organizational structures, that's your master schedule. That's pretty simple. You got to find your master schedule. You're going to need it later on, so I'll have you go ahead and find it now. Management routine. Those are things like duty rosters for your teachers and supervision schedule for your after school activities. Those are your management routines. Those are management functions. And then operations, um, different things like, we get this service or that service or the food, we have custodial, anything that's operational, that you've got that you find in your handbook would go along with that. So most of this stuff, the management routines and operations and organizational structure is usually in your teacher handbook. You know what your master schedule is, and you know what the state report card. Those are the things that we're looking for. To gather all those things together, and don't forget. Let's go on down here and look at the actual prompt. The budgeting process, the last one, I'm seeing folks leave that one off. Now, when we talk about the budgeting process, you can talk with your principal. Too many of you are talking to the school secretary or the school finance officer. She just handles the money. That's finance. Budgeting is the person who makes decisions about what we're going to spend our money on. And most specifically, I'm interested in what is the relationship of the school improvement team who manages the school improvement plan. What is their role in the budget? Again, you can have the best school improvement plan in the world, but if you don't align your budget with it, those items don't get funded. And that's what we're looking to see. What is that relationship between the principal, the school improvement team, and the budget in terms of how that budget supports the school improvement plan? That's what we're looking for here in task 1. That's what we're looking for here in task 1. Okay, so if you got those things, you're good to go. You're rolling. All right, again, task 2. I can't make this any simpler. Some of you've already figured it out. It's just the APTEL part of 1, 2, and 3. Just change the title from APTEL to OMA because this is exactly what you did in your APTEL. There's no need to reinvent the wheel here. Okay, everybody's got that. It's part of task 1, all of 2 and 3, and that will be your OMA task 2. All right, and then building a schedule. Assess the current scheduling procedure, strengths, and area for improvement. All right, so in task 1, you collected your master schedule. Now, this assessment is not so much of the schedule itself, but an assessment of the procedures that put it together. It's a bad thing when you have a bad master schedule in your school and everybody's mad at the schedule. It's worse when you start trying to monkey with it and make it better, because you only make it worse. If you've got a bad master schedule, that means you had a bad process that put it together. You need to work on your process. And that process starts with federal law, then state law, then local board policy, then best practices, research practices like reading before lunch, and then teacher input is number 5. Those are the 5 things that you're looking for when you're assessing the current process. Did you start with federal law and make sure all your federal programs were accommodated first? Then you went to state law, things like planning time, duty-free time, all of those things, those legal requirements, that document that I gave you already, that's where that one comes in. And then you look at your local board policy. Usually in most districts, they give you a list of non-negotiables, things that have to be in your master schedule based on local board policy. The district gives them to you. You need to find out what they are. And then best practices, don't have a split lunch shift. That's not good. Where you go 45 minutes to class and then go to lunch, and then you're by yourself for the last 45 minutes as a teacher because they don't come back from lunch. Things like that's not a best practice. And then teacher input. What kids should be together, which ones shouldn't be, what teachers should be teaching classes. You're looking at your data in terms of performance data, which teachers do the best job with which kids, things of that nature. When they want their planning, everybody can't have last period planning, but you can have some input. Teachers can have some input in that. So that's what you're looking to do. And then, is your master schedule aligned with your school improvement plan, your school improvement team findings? If we are stressing math this year, is there some way that we can get more math in the schedule, or more time, or do a reloop, or do a tutoring time for math, or something like that? That's what we're talking about when we talk about is your process aligned with your school improvement plan findings? That means school improvement plan. Legal requirements for teachers align with needs of diverse populations. That's federal. Input from faculty, utilizations of findings as a basis for revising that schedule. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to develop a new schedule based on your findings. You've assessed the process. Now, it doesn't have them in order here that they're supposed to go, but that's what's on this list. Again, it's federal first, then state, then local, then best practices, and then teacher input. Goes in that order. Okay, I've got a question here. Let me answer the question. Is it possible that there is no connection between the school improvement team and the budget? Yeah, I asked my principal. You might have asked it the wrong way. That may have been it. Sure enough, you may have asked it the wrong way. But what we're looking for is the school improvement team puts together the school improvement plan to improve the school. You did the first two pieces of that last semester. You did your instructional plan and you did your staff development plan. That's called the APSEL and the APTEL. But as you found out, we had you determine resources for those things. And if your school improvement plan does not provide, if your budget does not provide funding for those initiatives from your school improvement plan, they won't happen without money. And so there has to be a link between the two. You may find that there isn't a link, but there should be. Now, again, I don't like to get into what is. My job is to tell you what it ought to be. Sometimes you're in situation in schools where the scores come walking in the front door. You have a good pupil assignment. Rory, from the district that he works in, he knows what I'm talking about. It's all about pupil assignment in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. You get a good pupil assignment, well, that's a good thing. Life's good. You get a bad pupil assignment, man, you're struggling. Sometimes it's your demographics of your community. It's a tough thing sometimes, and so sometimes you can not do the right things and still the scores walk in the front door. I used to kid my wife all the time before she retired. She was a teacher and curriculum facilitator at the #1 middle school in the state. They had the top scores in the state. And I would tell her all the time that the most important person in the organization at Davidson IB was the custodian. As long as he could get the front door unlocked every day, the scores were going to walk right in. It's not quite that simple, but there's a lot of truth in that, unfortunately. So you can be in a place where you don't do it the right way, but usually your first time out as principal, and if you don't do well, it'll be your last time out. You're not going to be at the best place in town. You're going to be at a struggling school. That's usually where you're going to start out. And so what I'm trying to teach you is the important thing. Don't get knocked out as an AP because you didn't follow the rules and something bad happened. And then when you get to be principal, do it the right way and you'll have a chance to make it in that struggling school, because more than likely you're going to be in a struggling school. Back to questions again. How should we ask the budget question to the principal? You just simply ask them what the school improvement team involvement is in developing the budget. Do they have a seat at the table? You are what your record says you are. That's right. Who takes the bell schedule? That's local. The local Board of Education sets the bell schedule for schools. And whether schools use block scheduling, again, that's a board decision. That's what we're talking about, federal, state, then local. Local, that's exactly what local is. Local determines when you start and when you stop. And part of that when you start and when you stop is about buses. It's also about, if you're in the mountain counties, you go longer days, but fewer of them, those kinds of things. You got to get 185 days. You can either go 185 days or you can go 180 and add 10 minutes on each day. Those are decided by the local Board of Education. Is it a state, district, or school level that can be made since seat time has been waived for high school? That's a state decision. Seat time in terms of Carnegie units to get a credit of high school graduation is a state decision. DPI, the local Board of Education asks for a waiver from your Department of Public Instruction on seat time. And kids worked at a place where kids were in school from 10 to 4. Yeah, they had a waiver on that. When Steve Laws, who's in our department now, when he's superintendent in Wilkes, when there was a gas shortage and some other things, and there was a budget crisis, they did 144 days of school. They went an hour extra every day, and cut down to 100. They let them do that for a couple of years, but the state has to make that decision. Now the bell schedule, whether you go an hour extra, I mean, go 10. The state lets the local decide on that 5 extra days. It's 185 days now. The state lets the local decide that whether they're going to go 10-minute extra every day or 5 extra days. The state lets them decide the bell schedule and those kinds of things. So that's the state decision. Those are the things that you need to be asking and finding out from your administrators, though. Who makes this decision? Who makes this decision? Who makes that decision? I've kind of got the pump prime with my legal requirements document. I did that, but you need to be out asking them. You need to be surveying your special populations programs to find out what the rules are with them. Especially now that we're using the inclusion model where teachers don't have individual classes in the master schedule for EC classes. They go to the classrooms. You have to, that portends that you have to change your master schedule around some, so that those teachers can hit classes. Just like Emily, if she needs to be in 2 classes, she can't be in 2 places at one time. Those classes need to be scheduled at different times so that Emily can get to both of them if she's an inclusion EC teacher. That's what we're talking about, making sure that those things are fixed in your master schedule first, those federal programs. Because if you don't follow them, you lose those dollars and you lose your job. No district likes to have to revert money back to the federal government, and they'll take the money back if you don't spend it like they said. So that's why those federal programs have to come first.
Hey, real quick. So most of the time I found, because I've been in a bunch of different schools and taught for 14 years, that the EC schedule is what they do last. And we've pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed for them to do the EC and the 504 kids first. So how do you do that when I'm a little podunk teacher? And I know that my kids need that.
The point of this class is not for you to go back and beat up your administrator.
No, God, no. I would never
do that. It's for you to learn, when you get your opportunity, what the right way is to do it. Okay. I never tell you to be Don Quixote and tilt the windmill here. Don't poke the bear, whatever metaphor you want to use. But you just have to keep stressing that. But when you get that role and when you're in that job, you specifically can see those people have to be first, or they should be first. It shouldn't be last. Your federal program should come first because they have much stricter guidelines, and then your state law, then your local best practices, and teachers last. I've told you the story, and I'll tell it again. I visited a school, and it was tough to get there because it was in the middle of nowhere. And I got there, I had to wait an hour to see the principal, and I had to go back 2 weeks later to see the new principal. And the point of it being a tough place to get to is it wasn't on the way to anywhere. If you wanted to find it, you had to hunt it. And when, what are the chances that school was picked at random for a Title I audit? That would be none. Would be the same chance that my hair's going to grow back. None. It's possible, but it's not probable that they were selected at random for a Title I audit. The principal had forgot the order, and he had put teacher input first and federal law last. And he had put non-Title I kids in Title I classes to make the teachers happy and balance the load. That was all well and good until a Title I teacher called and told on him immediately. I've got 10 extra kids in my class that I'm not being paid to work with, and that the government's not paying for. They found out, and when you do things like that, you have to go home. Well, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay there. You got to find some other place to go every day. That's real. That happens when you intentionally misspend federal money. I mean, that's intent. He knew not to put those kids in that lady's class, but the other 2 teachers were beating him up every day. He got tired of getting browbeat every day by 2 old battle axe teachers, and so he did it. He put them in there. thinking we're in such an out of the way place, nobody will ever know. Well, the teacher picked up the phone, I'm sure, that day and called DPI and said, I've got 10 Title I kids, non-Title I kids in my Title I class. That's a misappropriation of federal funds with intent, because he knew what he was doing. And so when you're assaying or survey, a little later this semester, I'm going to have you go to an IEP meeting and who's in charge, that kind of thing. But one of the things that you need to know is that also when you're dealing with school-based committees, and that's things like your school intervention team, there are rules and guidelines, and if the state determines one of them to be a school-based committee, that means the principal's in charge. If something goes wrong, that comes back to you. So a lot of your intervention team and school-based committee, they need a seat at the table in master scheduling as well, because even though they're not technically federal programs, they are state programs, and they represent or they dovetail into a federal program. See, your intervention team is state mandated, and they're determining which kids get tested, or what process, MTSS, multi-tiered system of support, that these kids get. That's a state law, and that dovetails into what Emily does, federal law. And so they should have a seat at the table as well in that, and they should be in there in that federal group. And if something goes wrong and you don't fulfill the obligations of that group because you didn't schedule it in, they're going to come and get you. So you need to make sure that you do all these things. Now, once you've got all this information figured out, you develop a new master schedule that has improvements in it that you would suggest to your school administration. Don't let this bog you down. It doesn't have to be a lot of big changes. And certainly it wouldn't be something like a change from a 4x4 to a AB day or something like that. We're just talking about moving things in around in the schedule to make it to better to fit federal law, state law, local policy. Most of it's going to be best practices. It's getting tougher and tougher to schedule in elementary schools because of all of your specials, I guess we call them that. Your PE, art, music, those people, they're not all full-time assigned to your school anymore. A lot of those are itinerant people. That's making scheduling harder and harder for elementary schools. A lot of what you will suggest will be around those kinds of things. Again, that's local board policy is where that comes in, and best practices, trying to get more kids having reading before lunch. But with your specials not being there all day, that makes it really tough. Because when they're there, you've got, if you've got the PE teacher in the morning, some groups have got to go to PE. And so that, it makes it tough, but that's what I'm talking about when we talk about best practices. And then, of course, teacher input. So that's the first 3 tasks of the OMA. Again, the second one's already written. All of you did your APTEL last semester. It's already written. You're good to go. It's half of task 1, all of 2 and 3. And then I've outlined again what my expectations for task 1 and task 3. All right. Let's move on to our extension of 288 tonight. We were covering 288 last week. Duties, responsibilities of principals. To that end, let me share. Come on, you can do it. There it goes. I have a top 10 of hot spots, danger zones, things that can go bad for you. Again, if it'll pop up. There it is. That are related to that 288, 115C 288. The first one is no child left behind. It says it talks to you about data reporting and reporting acts of crime, and you're required to report acts of crime and violence to the police. And people say, well, why wouldn't I report those? Well, because you get penalized if you do, and you get fired if you don't. It's kind of like take your pick. If you don't report them, you're going to get fired. If you do report them, you may get fired if you get persistently dangerous. And so let me explain that. And this is outlined in the North Carolina Disciplinary Data Manual that we'll cover in depth later this semester. I'm going to do a quick show you kind of thing. Let me go back to the desktop and come on. Here it is. So this is the North Carolina Disciplinary Data Reporting Manual. We'll cover it more in depth later, but it says that 115C requires you that certain criminal offenses have to be reported, and it doesn't matter who did them. You know, I've had principals say, well, I didn't report that gun on campus because we didn't know whose it was. That doesn't matter. You have to report the gun. Or that was an adult. They just come right. It doesn't matter if it happened on your campus. Now, the bad part is there are 16 acts of crime and violence. 9 of them are acts of violence, and 7 are acts of crime. The acts of crime don't count against your persistently dangerous calculation. However, the acts of violence do, and here they are on the screen. According to No Child Left Behind, no child has to go to a school that's persistently dangerous. And the state of North Carolina uses these offenses in their calculation, and it's a percentage. It's one of these. You can't exceed 1 for every 200 children that you have. So if you have 1,000 kids, you can't exceed 5 of these incidents a year. Yeah. I used to tell people, well, it's 5 per 1,000. They would say, if I don't have 1,000 kids, it don't count. No, it's 1 per 200. 1 per 200 kids. Homicide, assault with serious bodily injury, assault with a weapon, rape, sexual offense, assault, kidnapping, robbery with a dangerous weapon, and indecent liberties. If you have too many of those occur, you'll go on the state's watch list the first time, and you'll have to go through some audits and some retraining and some supervision. A lot of things will happen. And after a couple of years, if things hadn't got better at your school, they'll declare you persistently dangerous. And that means parents have the same rights as if you were declared low performing. One or two things happens. Either the district has to bus you somewhere else, or they have to reconstitute your school. That means that the administrative team is fired, the teachers are furloughed and have to reapply for their jobs to come back. It gets really ugly. And so there's a reason why people don't report, or more important, or more aptly sometimes, they underreport these things. Now, remember, I told you, anytime you get a report of a sexual offense, a rape, assault, indecent liberties, you call the police immediately. You don't call somebody and start trying to do an investigation or a cover-up. You are not qualified to do investigations of this nature. And if you get caught covering up or not knowing the laws, and again, these are very clearly defined in the back of this manual. Very clearly defined in the back of the manual. So there's no discretion here. I've had principals tell me, well, I didn't report that. I used my discretion. Well, you know, I don't know how much discretion they use over at Walmart, but you're going to be working there now. There is no discretion. Nowhere in this manual says follow these rules unless you use your discretion. It does not say that. And violation of these rules is a class 2 misdemeanor. No prison time involved, but that automatically revokes your administrative license that you folks are working so hard to get right now. If you commit a class 2 misdemeanor by not doing this, they take that license. That means you can't practice in your state. You're out of a job. So this is about your job. That's why I've got it number 1 on the list. This was the number 1 reason why folks had to go home and, you know, that worked for me in my previous district before I retired, when I was in charge of these kinds of things. This is why people had to go home. There is no leeway here. You get caught doing this, we as an institution can't stand the public fallout, especially in towns that have a large media presence with major news channels and news organizations. You can't take the beating. There has to, you know, as we say in the business, there has to be blood. You know, somebody's got to go home in order to satisfy these people, or it's never going to go away. You know, I hate to say it, and I'm be the first to admit I'm not a very nice person.
Alex, are you pooping?
Question from Emily. I'll get to you to Emily in a few minutes here. but I'll be the first to say, when something bad would happen in the school and we were just kept on every news cycle, we were continuing to get beat. We were on breakfast. We would take it for a day, but if it got to the second day, it's crisis now. And I can't tell you the number of times that I prayed for there to be a shooting on the west side so we'd knock us off the news. I hate to say that, and Roy knows what I'm talking about. I'm telling that story for him. I'm a bad person, but I'm telling you, we'd be praying for anything that would knock us off the news cycle, because we knew if we didn't get off the news cycle, somebody was going to have to go home. You can't just keep on being the lead story and it be negative in a school district. You just can't do that over this kind of stuff, where one of these things has happened on your campus. It just won't go away. You need something, and you need something bad, something worse to happen in town to deflect the attention, and that's an awful thing. And so these things happen, but if you handle them correctly, if you handle them correctly, you can survive them. They won't be good, but you can survive them. But if you tried to do the investigation yourself, or if you tried to cover it up, or you underreported it, or you misinterpreted the law. I mean, I had a school in the northern part of the county that said, well, we believe the girl had sex, but we did an investigation. And I said, well, wait a minute, there's your first problem. But they said she's 16 years old, so that's the age of consent in North Carolina. I said, yes, it would be, except she's self-contained DC, which means she's mentally incapacitated, and they can't consent at any age. Oh, we didn't bother to read that part of the law. I've only told you 1,000 times. And so that was one principal and one AP. Or underreporting or trying to report it as something else. I had one school, a middle school in Charlotte. The parents finally went to the news media, got an interpreter, and there was a lot of sexual assaults occurring on the bus, and they were reporting them as bus misbehavior. And their argument was, well, it happened on the bus. I can't make that up. So that was the end of that. We had to get some new folks there. And that's what we're talking about here is you need to know the law. And see, there's a reason why these folks didn't report or underreported, because they were facing a penalty as a persistently dangerous school. That sword was hanging over their head, and it makes cowards of us all. We make an unethical decision. I can't tell you the number of times that when something happens, people wrote it down as what it really was. And then they'd come back to me and say, well, I want to change that. I've been thinking about that. Well, yeah, when you got the blood up out of the floor, it didn't seem near as bad as at the time when you had to tie off that bleeding artery. But you can't have buyer's remorse. You need to put it in correctly as what it is. And so to combat that, the state has the law from the state is 2448. If it's an act of crime and violence, it better be in the database within 24 hours. And if it's any other instant, it's 48-hour rule. So that you won't sit and think about it for 3 or 4 days and then decide, well, the furor has died down. Maybe it wasn't as bad as I initially thought. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. But time, kind of, when the smell of blood is out of the air, people all of a sudden, their courage takes a hit. Well, that's going to put us at 3 incidents this year. One more, and we're going to make that list. Well, there are ways to, with antecedent behaviors, watching the little stuff that becomes the big stuff. There's ways to deal with these incidents. But just hiding them or under-reporting them or not reporting them is not going to work out well for you. So you got to make sure you do that. So that's number one on my list of from the 288 things I'm pointing out that are sore spots. This is the first one from 288 that says that you must report. And I know that there's a penalty if you do, but there's a bigger penalty if you don't. So that's what that one is. Let me go back to my list of the top 10 things. All right, so that's what number one is. Number two, and that's what I was talking about. You got 2448. You got to put that stuff in there. You can't let those referrals stack up on your desk. As soon as you process them, they're supposed to go in there. You know that there is no such thing as there's no such thing as reporting later, or I'll fill out the forms later, or we'll just do a handwritten suspension note. An official by law that'll stand up in court suspension can only be generated through Power School by putting the incident in and it printing out. Anything less is illegal. All right, I've gotten a text here. I better read it. It's from one of our. Yeah, that's exactly right. The person that wrote me that, yeah, they were, but see, what your principal didn't understand in that case where you got shoved and didn't want you to press charges is whether you press charges or not doesn't change the fact that the incident happened. And that's mentioned in the state handbook that I was just in. We report incidents, not outcomes. Whether under that reasoning, if I shot you and left town and didn't get charged, you wouldn't be dead. Whether you press charges from being assaulted or not does not change the fact that you were assaulted. It still has to be reported. And it says so clearly, regardless of the consequence assigned, regardless of the outcome, we report incidents that occur. That's what I mean. Principals sometimes don't understand and think they can manipulate it by, if you don't go to the police, we won't have to tell. No, by law, if it happened, regardless of what you did, you have to tell it. Let me see if I can go back to that. Let me see if I've still kept that one up, or if I closed it. Did I close that one? No, I left it up. All right. Disciplinary data is organized around incidents. Not outcomes. And it also says here that it doesn't matter what consequence were assigned. That's immaterial. Let me see if I can find that one for you. But you can see right here, reporting is organized around incidents. So it does not matter what happens. It doesn't matter who did it. If it happens on your campus, you have to do it. Offenses must be reported if they occur on your site, regardless of the identity of the offender. And even if the offender is unknown, still does not matter. It also says in here, it doesn't matter, regardless of what the outcome or the consequence was, still doesn't matter. That doesn't change the fact that it happened. You have to report what happened, not what happened as a result of it happening. So again, that's an intentional misinterpretation of the manual. The manual is clear. I mean, that shows intent. That's why you lose your license, because you showed intent to not follow the law. First thing you better learn, and if you don't learn anything else from this law class this semester, nobody can give you permission to break the law. See, what that principal would say is, my area superintendent wants us to get our numbers down, and so he's given me permission to do that. No, that's against the law. You don't have permission to do that. And nobody's going to, and then even if it was told to you by your area superintendent, they'd never admit it in court, or they'd be the biggest idiot in the world, because they'd get them not only for violating the law, but for a criminal conspiracy. You can go to jail for criminal conspiracy. Not reporting won't send you to jail. You just lose your license and your job. If you admit to a conspiracy, you're going to get jail time. So nobody's going to do that. But one of the things, when I was with the district, I was in the central administration, and then we had areas, and we were in charge of them. And one of the things that I would go out to all of the meetings, and one of the things that I really loved about some of the districts, that when they would bring in the assistant principals, they'd tell them, if you're being told by anybody, your assistant superintendent for your area or from your principal not to follow this law, let us know right now. And that's when, let us know right now. Let us know, because we can't stand that. We'll withstand the incident itself. We can't withstand the cover-up. It's always the cover-up that gets you. So that's what we're talking about in number 2. All right, back to our list. And these are things that you may not have grasped when we looked at 288 last week. We talked about that. Student dress and publications can be regulated to avoid school disruption. Again, the law says that you're supposed to discipline students and maintain control and order in the school. That's what that means. Now, for some reason, folks think, well, I can't say anything about student dress, or I don't have the right to censor the student the student newspaper that says bad and scandalous and things that may actually slander somebody, yes, you are to do that as well, because you are to maintain order in your building. And for some reason, folks don't want to address that issue. You better address that issue. Now, I had a young man when I was high school principal who wore a dress. That didn't bother me at all, but I sent him home because his dress was too short. The girls complained that they couldn't wear him that short, so I had to send him home because his was too short. But I didn't, but now if him wearing a dress had caused a disruption, then I would have had to dress, and I did because it was too short. When he wore a longer dress, everything was fine, and then went on about our business. And so that's what I'm talking about. You better deal with it because the law says you will deal with it. Search and seizure. There's two different standards in your building, and you better know that. Again, this is under maintaining order. School people only have to have reasonable suspicion that a crime has occurred. The police need probable cause. They have a different standard, and you can't just tell them, go search him. The policeman would need probable cause. You could go, but don't do strip searches. Don't be in their underwear or make them take their clothes off. You can do pat downs, but be careful on that one as well. But remember, you as a school administrator can't direct the police to go and do that because they don't work for you, number one. Number two, they have a different standard, and the evidence wouldn't be admissible unless they had probable cause. Zero tolerance policies are not legal. What that means is, even though you're disciplining schools, you need to follow your district's handbook on code of conduct, on student discipline. But sometimes principals get angry because certain things keep happening in their building, and they get on the loudspeaker or they tell students, if you do this, I'm going to give you that. And that's a zero tolerance policy because there's no due process in that. If you fight again, I'm giving everybody that fights 10 days out of school. You can't do that. There's no due process in that. So zero tolerance means no due process. That you do this, you automatically get that without any hearing, without any, they don't get a chance to present their case or witnesses or any of that stuff. That's illegal. Since 1969, we're going to cover that in just a few minutes. Students get due process. So zero tolerance means if you do this, you get that. That is not legal. Abuse, neglect, and harassment must be reported to school and law enforcement. You know that. That's also in that reporting of what you've got to report. For some reason, folks think, well, I'm not sure, so I don't know if I have to report that. Yeah, you do. You absolutely do. FERPA, school data has to be kept confidential. It talks about maintaining student records in 288. That's part of what that means is you can't keep stuff written around.
Do we get the mail today?
Let me catch this one.
No. Did you ever figure out how to pay our dues?
What about threatening no pay if you take a sick day before or after vacation without a doctor's note? The principal can require a doctor's note, but I don't think it's actually policy to threaten no pay. But they can require a doctor's note. But they can't. The principal can't make the no pay decision. That's not within their purview. Principals don't do pay. Due process. There's two types of due process: substantive and procedural. Substantive is what you've got written in your code of conduct, as in terms of what you, the process you'll put a kid through when you discipline them. That's why one of your tasks this semester in assignments is to witness a due process incident where a student is brought in and for disciplinary infraction and to witness due process. There is a substantive, which means what you've got written down, then procedural, did you follow it? And see, that's what you're looking for, is you should know what they're supposed to get, and you're supposed to go look and see, is that what the student actually got when they processed? Did they actually get what they were supposed to in terms of their due process rights? And then the standard for disciplining kids is arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary is me and Emily go out back behind the gym smoking, and since I'm always in trouble when we come back, then they tell Emily just to go back to class and they give me a 3-day suspension. That would be arbitrary. We did exactly the same thing.
The book of checks is in there in those other drawers.
So, you know, both of us did the same thing. I got 3 days, she got none. That would be arbitrary. Now, capricious is when you give, why has it got to be Emily smoking? Because you were the first person that was up on the screen. Whoever's on the screen is who I refer to. Y'all rotate through my screen. So capricious is when you give more punishment than the law allows or the board policy allows. That's why you got to follow your handbook. I did a due process hearing. I used to do those for the district myself when we had big ones. I would go out and do those. I represented myself as my own legal counsel. We had legal counsel for the district, and then the student had legal counsel. And I was at a high school. We had a kid who had done a really, really serious infraction. We're talking about prison time infraction. And I advised him and his attorney, you know, anything you say will be used against you. These transcripts they are court documents. They'll go to court with you. But his attorney let him testify, which was stupid. Of course, his attorney looked like Booger from Revenge of the Nerds. I couldn't believe that he was actually an attorney that somebody had paid. He may have not been, for all I know. But anyway, he had the kid testify and admit his infraction. I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. There's got to be something here that I'm not getting. And so after he had it all on the record, then he, when he got his opportunity to present his case, the student's attorney said, this case should be thrown out based on this was an arbitrary decision. And I, you know, he had the floor, and I said, based on what? Why would this be an arbitrary decision? He was given a 10-day suspension and a due process hearing as called for in the student handbook, code of conduct. He said, oh no, I've got a copy right here, and it says that the maximum the student can be given for this is a 5-day suspension. I said, do you understand where we are? He said, yes, we're at this high school. I said, you understand that you're quoting from the elementary handbook, don't you? And so after he swallowed and hum-hawed, then he tried to have his client's testimony stricken from the record. No, he's already admitted what he did. But he was trying to say that we had given the student more punishment than the handbook had called for, but he was looking at an elementary handbook with an 18-year-old high school student. So people are going to be watching, and they're going to be searching. Just so happened in that case, he made a mistake, got the wrong handbook. But you can't always depend upon the lawyer being an idiot and getting the wrong handbook. And so if you have given more than the handbook calls for, you're going to get fried. You may lose your job over that. So you've got to know what the limit of your authority is to discipline students. Again, the standard is arbitrary and capricious. You can't catch two doing the same thing and only punish one, and you can't punish one. And I don't care how many times he's been in the office before, and you finally say, well, I was just fed up with him. I'm tired of him doing this same thing, so I gave him 10 days, and it says I can only give him 5. No, you can't do that. Those are the most common mistakes that administrators make. They get a little perturbed and forget that there are rules of due process, and it's usually around discipline incidents. And so that's when you're most likely to lose your cool, but that's when you get caught. So those are my top 10 in dealing with things from that'll get you, dealing with 288. We'd already talked about you got to do a monthly fire drill, but you've got to do that twice monthly inspection report. We've already talked about that. You need to file those away in case something bad does happen at your campus. You can show that it wasn't an ongoing problem that you did. I was talking with an administrator the other day, a retired administrator, and he was talking about one of the things that he used to do was set up scenarios in his building where he'd block a hallway off and pull a fire alarm, and would people be able to know what the alternative evacuation route and do things like that. That's pretty smart, is to be proactive and make sure that you've got all that, your fire drill stuff and your safety inspection, those kinds of things. Usually that takes care of itself, but these are the things that are most relevant on this list that pop up on a fairly regular basis in schools and administrators make bad calls on. These are fatal calls. You do something wrong on these, they'll come and get you. So that's why I wanted to cover the list tonight. Emily, I'm going to, as I pause and catch my breath here, I've only got 11 minutes left and I want to cover some major court cases. What's your question? Emily?
I got you. Sorry, I'll make it quick. So you said this reporting any active crime in the 24 hours, does that involve, like, if the parents tell you something at a parent-teacher conference that the family's getting hit, blah, 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 and that's all that too, right, or no?
Well, when an incident is reported to you that didn't happen at school, you know what the reporting rules are in terms of
parents for the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Things that are reported to you.
We're going to Brad and Lindsay's.
Things that are reported to you, you have to pass those on to your school resource officer.
Yeah.
You should just do that now. You're not reporting those things to the state in terms of your disciplinary data because they didn't happen on your campus.
Right.
That's one of those you have a duty to report to the police. You know, when people tell you that there's been abuse or a crime or whatever, you're to pass that on to the police. So there is no time limit on putting that in Power School because you don't have to, because it didn't happen at your school. But there is a time limit on, I believe it's 24 hours on when you've been told something that there's a case of abuse or neglect. Within 24 hours, you have to report that to police. Yes. That 24 hours does count on that, but not entering into your database because it doesn't have to.
Right, and the whole job thing too. It's part of our job to report, no matter who the person is that told you.
That's correct.
You have to report it or you can get fired.
That's correct. The police will sort it out. That's not up to you to do the investigation or sort it out. That's up to them. Where you get in trouble is if you don't tell it. I mean,
okay, so afterwards,
work you got in trouble for.
Afterwards, the family is irate about something. Just say this happened. I'm not saying it happened. Yep. Pretend it happened.
Yeah.
And they call and they harass a teacher about it.
Yeah. Well,
that turns into an administrative issue at that point, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay. That was just something I made up, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dogs haven't been fed.
I see. I'm answering a student question here. I get texts and emails while we're doing this, and that's fine. And so the answer to Dee's question is yes, that would be perfect. Just explain that, Dee. All right. Find the agenda. Okay. All right. Now, it says we'll examine court cases. I've already examined them for you. Right here they are. This is the most relevant court cases
where it has been
in modern times.
Up here on the bar for the longest time. I left it there because it was important.
You want to spend some time. If you want to spend some time with these, researching them, and you've got some of these in your law book, but these are the ones that matter. I see my time's running short, so I'm going to move through these. I may save some of these for next week because they're pretty important and there's a lot to know about some of these. So I'll go as far as I can until somebody blows the whistle. As we all know, in modern times, modern education, modern schooling started in 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education ruling, which said separate's not equal, that we're going to have to integrate schools. Not a lot was done on that until 1965. It was kind of just, okay, for 11 years, nothing really happened until 1965 when the Civil Rights Act was passed. And so I was in school in 1966 when we started integrating. And sure enough, we started integrating in 1966. And that caused a school consolidation, a lot of the small dual system, because we had to integrate, we had to put people together. We consolidated schools, closed a lot of the small ones. A lot of politicians were getting a lot of pressure from local that They did, a lot of folks didn't like school consolidation and school integration, so the state said we're out of that. So in 1966, North Carolina decided we're no longer going to be involved in capital funding. That's what builds schools. That's now going to be a local responsibility. We're not going to take the political heat of building schools for integration purposes. People weren't too much on board back then, and so the state got out of it in 66. The Elementary and Secondary Acts of 1965, which set up titles 1 through 9. You should read about all those individual titles. Everybody knows Title 1. That's reading and math support for low-income children. Everybody knows Title IX, which is equity for men and women. Everybody knows that. But there's a lot of good ones in between that you should read about. That came along in 1965 nationally, was the Elementary and Secondary Acts. As I told you, in 1969, Tinker versus Des Moines, for the first time, children had rights in schools. That meant no arbitrary, no capricious. Every kid had to get due process. That's what that meant. Came in 69. In 1971, although it happened in Charlotte, it is the national case for busing. The Swan case, Julius Chambers argued before the Supreme Court and won. And busing for integration was made law in 1971, and Charlotte was the test case. Julius Chambers, who later became president of the NAACP and president at North Carolina Central College, the North Carolinian Julius Chambers was the lead attorney on that case, on the Swan case. In 1972, we had the amendments to Titles 1 through 9. In 74, we had Public Law 94-142. First time ever we had federal funding for special education. A personal note, by that time I was through, but when I went to school, special ed kids basically worked as custodians and janitors and cafeteria helpers until 1974, when the law says that they have to be educated alongside everybody else. What a wonderful thing. In 75, we had the Robinson case, which was a big case again, trying to repeal the Elementary and Secondary Acts, but the Robinson case, the acts were upheld. The titles 1 through 9 were upheld. In 1984, North Carolina passed the Basic Education Plan. It said every child must get a basic education. Took 5 years, but by 1989, the standard course of study, those big white notebooks, if any of you are old enough to remember them, they were fully integrated. They were fully functional. By 1989, they were throughout every public school in North Carolina was on the standard course of study. So at that time, we started the accountability program, which was called Performance-Based Accountability, which became the state ABC program. That happened when we passed the Basic Ed Plan in '84. Somebody said, well, how are we going to know if they're getting the Basic Ed? And somebody said, uh-oh, that means we're going to have a standardized curriculum. It was called North Carolina Standard Course of Study. And then once we got the curriculum fully instituted, fully vested in all schools, then we started the accountability, where we started state testing to measure that. That's when the state report card came out, integrate, intercourse testing, all of those kinds of things. Along with the Basic Ed Plan was the first attempt, one of the first nationally, to pay for performance. It was called Career Development Program. It had 3 status levels according to the outcomes of your students. It crashed after a few years. It was very good, but they refused to fund it. Teachers made status 1, 2, and 3. Status 3 teachers are basically what we call curriculum facilitators now. And there's still some of the remnants of those kinds of things around. I worked in 2 different districts that had career development. One was a state pilot and one was a local pilot. During that time, I made the transition from Burke County, where I was principal, and then in the central office there, which was a state pilot to Charlotte Mecklenburg. I came there, and they were their own local pilot for career development. Was a good thing, but we just refused to fund it. So in 94 through 98, in the state of North Carolina, we had the Leandro case, and it was low wealth districts sued the state for district power equalizing. What that means is if you're in a low wealth district and you can only afford, the state gives you $7,000 per pupil, and the state gives Charlotte Mecklenburg $7,000, but Charlotte Mecklenburg could put 4 more with that for a total expenditure of $11,000 per pupil, and the low wealth district can't. They wanted the state to give them $2,000 less and give the low wealth district $2,000 more. So in the end, they were both spending $9,000 on students. That's called district power equalizing. That's in your finance book. But that lost out. That did not happen. In its place, however, as a result of the Leandro case, that's how we got the North Carolina Public School Lottery. What they said is we'll have a lottery, and we'll raise funds, and we'll do special projects in these low wealth counties. That money's pretty much become politicized, and what little ever gets to school is pretty much wasted. But most of it, 95% of it, never gets to schools. The company that administers it takes a big cut. The prize money takes a big cut, and what little bit is left is completely politicized. Things like they built a school cafeteria up in one, either Stokes or Surrey County, that was completely unneeded. And their rationale was we wanted all of our kids to be able to eat lunch together. Was just a total pork barrel project. So the lottery has been wholly unsuccessful in helping public schools in any way. And that the whole idea, and it's actually hurt because low wealth people tend to play the lottery, so it only makes things worse in low wealth districts. But that was the Leandro case. The Capuchon lawsuit in Charlotte Mecklenburg, 30 years after Swan, reversed Swan, and no more busing for desegregation. And if schools resegregated, the district or the state was not obligated to remedy. And so Charlotte Mecklenburg resegregated immediately. After 30 years of desegregation, it resegregated immediately. Within 2 years, it was as segregated as it had ever been before. No Child Left Behind, about the low performing status. Bad things happen to you if you're a principal of a low performing school. Bad things happen to you if you're persistently dangerous. We covered that earlier tonight. We started at that time toward growth model testing in 2001. We also started the teacher working conditions survey. That's done because every state is required to have an initiative for teacher retention. Ours is the teacher working conditions survey. We began looking at, you had to have highly qualified teachers and certified teachers in all areas. In 2010, our growth model, EVOS, was unveiled. Value added, where you measure a kid's growth. I'll cover that more later. Paper performance was reintroduced in 2010. We still haven't gotten to that, but it was. The lottery, pre-K, scholarships for low wealth kids, those things were all introduced in 2010. And then 13 through 14, vouchers were reaffirmed. Charter school expansion, in order to pay for some of these things. Master's pay was eliminated, and elimination of career status for teachers. I'll go more in depth into these later on, but I wanted to get these out there. These are the things that you should be researching in terms of court cases. South Carolina people, I'm sorry I didn't have anything for you, but these are good exemplars for you to research as well. And so that's the material that I wanted to cover with you tonight. Again, if you want to do a little digging, I would suggest do a little digging on some. I'm directing you to what areas that you should be looking for court cases. But this is what has shaped public education in both Carolinas over the last 65 years. These things right here, since 54, that'd be the last 64 years. All right, so I think that covers everything that I needed to cover tonight. I've run 3 minutes over. I apologize for that. look at this document again. Do some looking at court cases. Let this be your guide, and we'll talk more about these later. I appreciate what you're doing and how hard you're working. Your work is good. I have no complaints. Dr. Stedman and I talked today. We're very pleased with you. He was with us a while tonight. He emailed me he had to go to another meeting, but you should have next to your 603 class in Blackboard under my courses. And this is the last thing for tonight, a little housekeeping issue here. Let me go back to share screen, desktop, share screen. Let me get out of this one. When you go to Blackboard, when you go to Blackboard and you get to the list of my courses, come on, you can do it. My courses, wait while the module loads. Takes a while to load mine. Come on, you can do it. All right. I've got everybody's in here. All right. You're going to see next to your 603, the old XM shell. Now, if you put something in your XM internship shell, it comes directly to me, but you don't need to use it anymore. I may have it just taken out. You should have a new shell, I hope, that says Mels Clinical Internship Shell Stedman. And that's Dr. Stedman's shell for you to use. So you can communicate your work directly to him. You can still put it in drop boxes to me in our regular class shell. But I've got this one set up in case you don't have me or you should have me and Dr. Stedman on through. But anyway, right here where it says AppSell, AppTel, OMAs, this is where you are. OMA task for review. There's no grading in this. This goes in there, and Dr. Stedman will give you comments on your work immediately. Now, we'll put it in, if he wants to use these evaluation Dropbox and give you a grade later on, that's up to him. I've got this set up for him now so that you just click on OMA task for review. When you click on that, remember, there's going to be a Dropbox for each of your tasks in there. You just drop it in there, and it'll be a discussion board. It'll be a thread, and he'll be able to review your work. It'll go straight to him. And this is the quickest way and the best way. And we have a record of your work, and if you lose it, we've got it. Or it'll be saved in Blackboard here. There's nothing punitive about it. But so his shell is now up and working. I got his loaded last night. We got the database yesterday after drop add, and so he's up and running now. So you have your class shell. You put things in for me. I'll get back to you same day. And Dr. Stedman will do the same thing. So this is the way that you can connect with him again. And I didn't see him tonight, or I'd give him a chance to say hey to you, but he said, tell you hey. Gomer said hey. So if you're old enough to know what that means, then you're too old to be in this program. But he's looking forward to working with you. As am I. I'm really pleased. Y'all did a great job last semester. You've come a long way. We've kind of weaned you a little bit this semester, as I warned you we would, but you're doing great. I have no complaints. Y'all are picking up the mantle and emerging as leaders, and that's what's important. And I appreciate it. I've had a great time tonight, as always. I'm glad I was honored to be with you. And so I will see you again next week. I hope all of you have a good week. Thank you. Bye-bye.